A day before my son's wedding, his fiancée whispered in my ear. "Starting tomorrow, you won't be part of this family anymore. You won't be welcome." Something inside me broke. I decided to stay home, devastated. What I didn't know was that hours later, their wedding would fall apart completely for a reason no one expected. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments from where you're watching this video. We love to know how far our stories reach. Starting tomorrow, you're just old history to this family. That's exactly what my son's fiancée whispered to me on the eve of their wedding, while other guests chatted animatedly in the background. Her smile never wavered for a second, but her eyes were as cold as ice. I was paralyzed. The gift I had brought, a photo album I had spent months preparing, hung from my trembling hands like a dead weight. In that moment, something inside me broke. After 2 decades raising my son Gabriel alone, making every imaginable sacrifice, this woman was calmly telling me that I no longer had a place in her life. My name is Elena, and for 25 years, I was mother and father to Gabriel. When my husband left us, Gabriel was only 5 years old, still holding that dinosaur plush toy he never let go of, not even to sleep. I remember the first night we were alone when he asked with those big eyes, "Mom, when is Dad coming back?" And I, swallowing my tears, just smiled and said that sometimes people need to take different paths. Since then, it was years waking up at 5 a.m. to get him ready for school before rushing to my first job at the clinic where I worked as a receptionist. Then I'd go to my second job at a large store until nightfall. Many times I'd get home so exhausted I could barely take off my shoes before falling asleep. But I always saved energy to listen to how his day went, to help him with his homework, to be his cheerleader at his school football games. I saved every cent possible. I gave up new clothes, cut my hair, sold the car to pay for his university tuition when scholarships weren't enough. When Gabriel graduated in law, I felt I had kept the silent promise I made to that scared child. He would have all the possible opportunities, no matter what I had to sacrifice. Then, when he introduced me to Daniela 3 years ago, I really tried to like her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and eloquent. Everything I was not. She worked at a renowned advertising agency and was always impeccably dressed. Gabriel seemed enchanted. Her eyes sparkled when she entered the room, and all I wanted was to see him happy. But there was something about Daniela that had been bothering me from the start. The way her smile faded when Gabriel turned his back on her. How she spoke to me with that condescending tone, as if she were doing me a huge favor just by speaking to me. At family gatherings, she would monopolize the attention by talking about international trips and famous clients, rarely showing interest in my life or the childhood stories of Gabriel. "Oh, how sweet," she would say when I mentioned something from the past, as if she were talking to a child. On Gabriel's 30th birthday, I prepared the chocolate and raspberry cake that I had always made for him since he was 12. It was our tradition. When I arrived with him to the party, Daniela took the plate from my hands with a tense smile. "Gabriel is following a low-carb diet, Elena, but thank you for the effort." The cake remained untouched in the kitchen while Gabriel, unaware, ate the gourmet canapés she had ordered. I swallowed my wounded pride, as I always did. That was just her way of being, I thought. She comes from another world, she doesn't understand our simple traditions, and deep down, I hoped that with time, she would see me as family. The engagement came quickly, just a year after they started dating. Gabriel was radiant when he told me he had proposed to her during a sophisticated dinner at a restaurant by the sea. I forced a smile and hugged him tightly, telling him how happy I was for him while struggling against a feeling of loss that I couldn't explain. The wedding preparations excluded me completely. I wasn't called for menu tastings, cake selection, visits to florists, or any other decisions. When I subtly asked if I could help, Daniela replied, "Don't worry about anything, Elena. We've hired the best professionals, you just need to look good on the day." And that's how it was until the eve of the wedding when I decided to make one last effort to build a bridge. I prepared an album filled with photos and memories of Gabriel's life, from his first steps to his graduation at the law faculty. Each page told a story of love and overcoming. Each photo carefully chosen to show the wonderful man my son had become. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner with the album wrapped in silver gift paper. Daniela intercepted me at the entrance, her rehearsal dress shining under the soft lights. "Elena, did you come?" she asked with a superficial smile. "Of course," I replied, extending the package. "I made this for you. I thought maybe you could look through it together tonight, before the big day." That's when she leaned in, her expensive perfume filling my space, and whispered those words that would stay with me forever. "Starting tomorrow, you are just ancient history to this family. You've done your part, you raised Gabriel. Now he is my husband, my family. And you are just extra luggage. Don't embarrass us by clinging to him." I was frozen, stunned. Before I could respond, she continued. "In fact, maybe it's better if you don't even show up tomorrow. It saves us the drama, Elena. It's not like anyone really expected you to be there. I don't remember how I got out of there. I don't remember driving home, I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed, looking at the deep blue dress I had bought especially for the wedding, while silent tears ran down my face. That night I made a decision I never thought I would make. For the first time in Gabriel's life, I wouldn't be there for him, I wouldn't show up at the wedding, and that decision, which seemed like my final surrender, would end up being the catalyst for a devastating truth that no one was prepared to face. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clear and blue sky, the perfect kind of day that every bride dreams of for her big moment. I woke up before the alarm, years of early rising habits ingrained in my body like an internal clock. For a moment, I moved automatically. I made coffee, took the dress off the hanger, separated the shoes I had bought especially for the occasion, simple but elegant, the kind a proud mother would wear at her son's wedding. Then Daniela's words came back to me like a punch in the stomach. "You are just extra luggage." I sat at the kitchen table. My hands were trembling around the coffee cup, while the morning sun drew patterns on the tiled floor I had installed years ago when I couldn't afford to hire a professional. My phone started vibrating incessantly. Messages from family and friends, all on their way to the church, all asking where I was. I ignored each one of them. After an hour, the first call from Gabriel came. I let it go to voicemail, unable to hear his voice without falling apart. His voicemail sounded worried, confused. "Mom, where are you? We're all waiting for you. Please call me." It was the first time in 25 years that I deliberately disappointed him. The pain was almost physical, like something vital was being torn from me. But Daniela's words had opened a wound that I had been ignoring for a long time. For years, I put Gabriel's needs above mine. I swallowed veiled insults and condescending treatment, all in the name of love for my son. But that morning, something different stirred within me. A voice said, "You deserve respect, you deserve dignity." For the first time, I was choosing myself over my son. At 10 a.m. the doorbell rang. It was my sister Luisa, still dressed for the wedding, her face a mix of concern and irritation. "Elena, what the hell are you doing? Everyone is looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour." I gestured for her to come in, unable to speak, with tears threatening to spill. We sat in the living room, the navy blue dress still hanging in the closet like a ghost of what it should be. Finally, I managed to say, "I'm not going." Luisa looked at me as if I had just announced I was moving to Mars. "What do you mean, you're not going? It's your son's wedding." Daniela told me that after the wedding, I'm no longer part of her family. She said I shouldn't even show up today. Luisa paled, indignation replacing confusion on her face. "She said that, she looked at you and said that." I nodded, tears finally winning the battle against my self-control. "She said I'm extra baggage, that I've done my part and now I should fade away." Luisa sat heavily next to me, taking my hands in hers. For a long moment, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. "Oh, Elena," she whispered, her voice choked. "I always knew something was wrong with that girl. She loves him in her own way." I tried to hold on to a last spark of hope for Gabriel's future. "No," Luisa shook her head firmly. "Love doesn't treat people like that. Love doesn't exclude, love doesn't humiliate. As we talked, my phone kept vibrating with messages and calls. Gabriel, growing more desperate, confused friends, Daniela's family, strangely, completely silent. At 11 a.m. the church bells began to ring in the distance. I imagined the guests taking their seats. Gabriel nervously at the altar. Daniela, probably satisfied with my absence, preparing in some side room of the church. This should be the beginning of the end of my story as the central figure in Gabriel's life. A step into the shadows, to the role of a distant figure tolerated at holidays and birthdays, always kept at a distance. But fate had other plans. A little after noon, when the bells should have been announcing the union of the new couple, my phone rang again. It was Louisa, reluctantly returning to the church at my request. Her voice trembled so much I could barely understand her words. "Elena," she whispered, as if afraid to be heard. "The wedding didn't happen." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, it didn't happen?" "Gabriel found out," she said, her voice breaking. "God, Elena, it's terrible. He found out about Daniela moments before the ceremony. The floor seemed to disappear beneath my feet. He found out she had been cheating on him with her boss for months. And there's more, much more. Her family is in debt, Elena. They needed Gabriel's money to save themselves. The prenuptial agreement he insisted on was a trap to channel his future earnings into their family's accounts. The world spun around me as the pieces fell into place. Occasional comments about Gabriel's future salary, Daniela's insistence on controlling all financial aspects of the relationship. The way his father had smiled enigmatically during the engagement. "Your struggle is over, Elena. Now it's our turn to take care of Gabriel." It wasn't love. It never was. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to use my son to exploit everything he had worked so hard for, everything we had achieved together. "How are you, Gabriel?" That was all I could ask, my voice almost unrecognizable to my own ears. There was a long pause, filled only with Luisa's irregular breathing. Devastated, he finally responded, but also determined. "You should have seen it, Elena." When he confronted Daniela in front of everyone, he was different, as if he had finally woken up from a long sleep. When I hung up the phone, I sat still for several minutes, trying to process everything. The uncelebrated wedding, the betrayal, the financial scheme. And amidst all of that, the absence that should have destroyed me, mine, ended up being the only thing that saved me from witnessing my son's public humiliation. Perhaps, I thought with bitter irony, I should thank Daniela for keeping me away on that day. The following hours passed in a blur. My phone kept ringing, each new tone bringing more details about the disaster that had unfolded at the church. Guests leaving in shock. Daniela's family trying to control the damage, inventing stories, blaming Gabriel for abandoning her at the altar. And at the center of the storm, my son, with whom I still hadn't managed to speak directly. Around 3 p.m., a loud knock at the door made me jump. I opened it to find Gabriel standing there, still wearing the wedding suit, the tie undone and red eyes. Without saying a word, he entered and hugged me so tightly that it almost took my breath away. "Mom," he whispered into my hair. "Did you know?" My heart felt like it was shrinking. "Did you know what, son?" "About Daniela, about who she really is." I gently pulled away, looking into his eyes. I knew she didn't want me around. I knew she didn't respect me. But no, Gabriel. I didn't know about the betrayal or about her family's financial plans. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "She told you not to go to the wedding, didn't she? That's why you weren't there." I couldn't lie to him. I never could. "The night before, she told me that after the wedding, I wouldn't be part of your family. He said it was better that I didn't even introduce myself." His face darkened. A new wave of pain and anger passed through his features. "And did you believe him? Did you believe I would allow that?" That question hit me like a bolt of lightning. Me, after all those years raising him, knowing his heart better than anyone, had I really believed he would let them take me out of his life? The truth hurt. Yes, I had believed it, not because I didn't trust Gabriel, but because I had seen the power Daniela had over him, the way he seemed blind when it came to her. Gabriel, she turned you into someone else when she was near, someone you hardly recognized. He slumped onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. I know, he murmured between his fingers. I know. I sat beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. What happened in the church? I want to hear it from you. Gabriel took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. Roberto, my godfather, he received photos of Daniela with her boss Carlos. Recent photos from 2 weeks ago. They were, well, it was clear what was going on. He swallowed hard. Roberto showed them to me minutes before the ceremony started. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some misunderstanding or old photos from before we met, but they weren't. I completed softly. No, the date was there, in the corner of the photos, and she was wearing the bracelet I gave her on our last anniversary. His voice broke. I confronted her in the preparation room. First, she denied everything. Then she said it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But then her cousin Mariana, who was drunk on champagne and nerves, let something slip about the prenuptial agreement, about how Daniela's father had celebrated the night before that his financial problems would be solved after tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the betrayal my son had suffered. It wasn't just an infidelity, it was a carefully laid trap, a web of lies spun by people who were supposed to love him. That's when I realized, Gabriel continued, his voice gaining strength, that it never was about me, it was about what I could provide. My future salary, my career, my contacts, all part of a plan. And what did you do? I asked, although I already knew the answer. A sad smile passed over his lips. I walked up to the altar, not to get married, but to announce to all the guests that the wedding was cancelled, that Daniela had betrayed my trust and that our relationship was over. I imagined the scene. My son, always so reserved and discreet, standing in front of 200 guests, exposing his pain and disappointment. The courage that must have taken left me speechless. Her family went crazy, he continued. Daniela's father threatened me right there in front of everyone. He said that I didn't know who I was dealing with. Daniela's mother started shouting that I was humiliating her daughter, and Daniela stopped. The pain was clear in her voice. Daniela completely transformed. All that charm, all that sweetness disappeared. She called me a coward. She said I was exaggerating, that everyone cheats, that I was ruining the best thing that had ever happened to me. I took her hand in mine, gently squeezing it. I'm so sorry, son. He squeezed my hand back, his eyes meeting mine. Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the betrayal. Not even finding out about the financial scheme. It was realizing that she wanted to separate you from me, that she treated you like something disposable. His voice cracked. You who gave me everything, who never once abandoned me. The tears I had been holding back since he arrived finally overflowed. Oh, Gabriel, and today when you weren't there, at first I was furious. I thought you had abandoned me just when I needed you the most, but now I understand. She forced you to do that. She made you believe it was what I wanted. I should never have believed her, I admitted, guilt consuming me. I should have been there for you, no matter what she said. Gabriel shook his head firmly. No, Mom. Maybe it was better this way. You didn't have to witness that circus. And in some strange way, your absence made me see things more clearly. When I realized that you, the most reliable, most constant person in my life, weren't there, it was like something clicked inside me. I started questioning everything. A long silence fell between us, filled only by the distant sound of birds in the garden and the occasional ring of my cell phone, which we now ignored completely. What now? I finally asked. Gabriel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had made since childhood when he was deep in thought. I'm not sure. I have to deal with the practical side, cancel the honeymoon, return gifts, and I imagine her family won't give up easily. Her father has connections and, it seems, is desperate for money. We'll face it together, I asserted, feeling a new determination grow within me. Whatever it is. Gabriel smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen on his face in months. We nodded, squeezing each other's hands. That night, as Gabriel slept in the room I had kept intact for him all these years, I sat on the back porch looking at the stars. The pain of what my son was going through was real and deep. But there was also a secret sense of relief, as if we had narrowly escaped something much worse than a cancelled wedding. Years of manipulation, isolation, financial and emotional abuse. I didn't know then that the story was far from over. In fact, the events of that day would only be a prelude to a much larger battle. A battle that would test not only our resilience, but also our dignity, our true selves. The following week, after the cancelled wedding, as I started to call it in my mind, the storm I feared finally arrived. It began as whispers, small shockwaves that spread through our relatively small community. Then, almost overnight, it turned into a tsunami. Daniela's version of the event started circulating on social media. An abandoned bride, devastated by an insecure groom who had fallen under the manipulations of a possessive mother. She posted a photo of herself in the wedding dress with makeup smudged artistically, with the caption, "Some people don't know when to back off. Some mothers can't cut the umbilical cord." Comments flooded her page. Strangers offering support, friends demanding to know what kind of man abandons a woman at the altar and what kind of mother interferes in her adult son's relationship. Her narrative was convincing, emotional, and completely fabricated. Ignore it, I advised Gabriel when he showed me the posts. His face was pale with anger. The people who matter know the truth. But it soon became clear that it wasn't so simple. Lies have long legs, as my grandmother used to say, and Daniela's were running a marathon. I started noticing strange looks in the supermarket, conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached in the pharmacy. An old school friend sent me a message asking if I had really ruined Gabriel's wedding out of jealousy. Even the priest of our parish, who had known me since Gabriel was a child, called me for a private conversation about letting children follow their own path. The indignation I felt was quickly replaced by something more painful, shame. Not because I believed the lies, but because, after all those years of silent sacrifice, of maintaining dignity even in the most difficult circumstances, I was being portrayed as the villain in someone else's story. Meanwhile, Gabriel was facing his own battles. One of the partners at the law firm where he worked, coincidentally a friend of Daniela's father, began to question his judgment and emotional stability. Clients he had worked so hard to secure were suddenly reluctant to work with him. Then, on a cloudy Thursday morning, about 10 days after the cancelled wedding, the final bomb dropped. An official letter delivered by a serious-faced messenger addressed to me. I opened the envelope with trembling hands to find a legal notice. Daniela's family was suing me for defamation, emotional damage, and the most absurd charge, interference in contractual relationships. I immediately called my friend Clara, who worked as a legal assistant at a large law firm in the city. She came directly to my house after her shift, her face grave as she read the document. "This is pure intimidation, Elena," she finally said, placing the papers on the kitchen table. "They're trying to scare you. This interference in contractual relations is just a fancy way of saying you ruined their financial plan." Financial plan? Clara looked at me in surprise. "Didn't you know? Daniela's family is practically bankrupt. Her father lost millions in bad investments over the past few years. They were counting on the wedding to stabilize their finances." That information hit me like a stone, so it had never been about love or even for a moment. It was about money, control, financial security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, a small act of self-preservation after years of her manipulations, I gave Daniela the perfect opportunity to change the narrative. She couldn't be seen as the opportunistic bride, so she painted me as the bitter and controlling mother who couldn't let go of her son. It was brilliant, in a twisted way. The next day, Gabriel received a similar letter. He came home pale, tossing the papers on the table. "They're threatening to sue me too. Daniela's father said if I don't clear his name publicly, he'll drag you through the courts. He said he'll ruin you financially." My heart raced. Gabriel had just graduated from law school. He was still paying off student loans and his career was just starting. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could drain him before he had a chance to establish himself professionally. "What are you going to do?" I asked, fearing the answer. Gabriel clenched his fists, a fierce determination in his eyes that reminded me of the boy who stood up to bullies twice his size to defend a disabled classmate. "I'm going to fight, Mom. I'm going to fight for both of us." That night, as I couldn't sleep, I remembered something Daniela had said months ago, during one of her condescending moments. "You don't understand how the world works, Elena. Perception is everything. People believe what they see, not what's true." She was right about that. Perception mattered. People believed her because she played the part of the victim well. If perception was her weapon, then we needed to fight with the truth. Not in whispers, not politely behind the scenes, but openly, publicly, and I had exactly the ammunition we needed. The next day, I rummaged through my small home office, finding every piece of evidence I had almost instinctively saved over the years. Emails that Gabriel had forwarded to me where Daniela spoke about her financial expectations for her future. Text messages that he had shown me where she questioned why he insisted on considering pro bono work when he could be earning real money. And most importantly, a copy of the prenuptial agreement that Gabriel had asked me to review with clauses so clearly predatory that any judge would see the intent behind them. When Gabriel came home from work, I spread everything out on the living room table. "Look," I said, pointing to the papers. "We have our own weapon, the truth." He examined the documents, nodding slowly. "Yes, we have evidence, but how do we use it against them? If we go public, it will only seem like revenge and feed their narrative that we are vindictive and bitter." I considered his words. He was right. We needed to be strategic. "You're right. We can't just throw this on social media. We need professional help." It was Clara who provided the answer when we consulted her the next day. "I know an investigative journalist," she said, "Paulo Mendez. He specializes in exposing financial fraud and corporate schemes. If you have concrete evidence, he can turn this into a legitimate report, not just social media gossip." The idea was perfect. An investigative journalistic report would have a credibility that our individual statements would never have. And more importantly, it would shift the focus from the family drama narrative to financial fraud where it truly belonged. Paulo found us in a discreet cafe in the city center, a short man with a gray beard and piercing eyes that seemed to scrutinize every word we said. He listened to our story in silence, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "What you have is strong," he finally said, "especially the prenuptial agreement and the financial records of the Ramirez family, but I need more. I need independent confirmation." In the following 2 weeks, Paulo worked tirelessly investigating the financial history of Daniela's family, interviewing former employees of their bankrupt companies, even obtaining an anonymous statement from one of the bank employees who handled their problematic accounts. Meanwhile, Daniela's campaign against us intensified. She gave a tearful interview to a local magazine detailing how I had poisoned Gabriel against her over the years, how I couldn't accept another woman in his life. Her family began making calls to Gabriel's business contacts, hinting that he was emotionally unstable and unreliable for important legal matters. The pressure was almost unbearable. Gabriel was arriving home more and more exhausted, his eyes sunken from nights without sleep. I myself could barely leave the house without feeling the stares, whispers, and silent judgment of the neighbors I had known for decades. Then, exactly a month after the cancelled wedding, Paulo's reportage was published, detailing the financial schemes of the Ramirez family. The reportage occupied 2 full pages in the region's most respected newspaper, with an even more detailed online version. It was devastating in its clinical precision. It detailed the successive bankruptcies of Mr. Ramirez's companies, unpaid loans, and previous fraud accusations that had been quietly resolved outside the courts. It included a legal analysis of the prenuptial agreement with independent lawyers, classifying it as predatory and ethically questionable. And yes, it mentioned the extramarital affair that had been the catalyst for the cancelled wedding, with blurry but recognizable photos of Daniela with her boss in an elegant restaurant, clearly in a romantic situation. The reaction was immediate. Online comments flooded in, not against me or Gabriel, but against Daniela and her family. So she wanted his money, not his heart. That poor mother. Imagine being treated like that after raising your child alone. The Ramirezes were simply house rich. The tide had turned. The truth exposed to the light of day was doing what our words alone could never have achieved. That night, Gabriel and I sat on the porch of the house drinking tea in silence. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air. Only shared exhaustion and perhaps a small thread of hope. "Do you think it's over?" I finally asked. Gabriel looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. Her family is cornered now, and desperate people do desperate things." He turned to me, his eyes clearer than they had been in months. "But at least now we're fighting with equal weapons, the truth against their lies." I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The battle might not be over, but now we had a real chance of winning. And most importantly, we had each other. The bond Daniela had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. What I didn't know then, as we sat peacefully on the porch that night, was that the Ramirezes still had one last move planned, a move so bold, so reckless that no one could have foreseen it, and that would change our lives forever. The calm that followed the publication of Paulo's reportage was like the eye of a hurricane. A brief moment of peace before the next wave of chaos. For 2 weeks, Gabriel and I breathed a little easier. The judgmental looks decreased. Supportive messages started to arrive. Even some clients who had distanced themselves from Gabriel's law firm returned, admitting they had been misinformed about the situation. I should have suspected that silence from the Ramirez family. People like them don't disappear silently when exposed. They usually retaliate in ways you could never anticipate. The retaliation came on a regular Wednesday when Gabriel was in court defending a case and I was grocery shopping. My phone rang, an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Señora Elena Oliveira," a formal male voice asked. "Yes, it's me. I'm Detective Martins from the Civil Police. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible to give a statement." My heart froze. A pause. Statements about what exactly? The sound of papers being flipped. "We have a formal accusation against you for extortion, blackmail, and threats against the Ramirez family." The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling down the supermarket aisle. "That's ridiculous." "I never," Mrs. Oliveira, the detective interrupted, his voice now softer. "I strongly advise you to come accompanied by a lawyer." I left the groceries there and drove home in shock. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open the door. Once inside, I immediately called Gabriel, who rushed out of court as soon as he heard my trembling voice. When he arrived home, I had already found the document that an officer had left at my door during my absence, an official summons detailing the accusations. According to the complaint, I had threatened the Ramirez family with public exposure of false information unless they paid a significant sum of money to keep my silence. "This is completely fabricated," Gabriel said, his face red with anger as he read the document. "They're trying to criminalize the fact that we exposed the truth about them. But how can they just make up accusations like this? They don't need proof." Gabriel ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "For an investigation, they don't necessarily need proof. And they probably fabricated some kind of evidence, fake emails, edited recordings, anything to give the initial accusation credibility." And now my voice was small, even to my own ears. "Now," Gabriel said with determination, "we will fight, and this time not just for our reputation, but for your freedom." The next morning we went to the station. Gabriel had spent the entire night preparing our initial defense while I sat beside him at the kitchen table, providing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the Ramirez family. The police station was an old and imposing building in the center of the city. As we climbed the steps to the entrance, I noticed a small group of reporters gathering. Someone had leaked information about the charges to the press. "Don't say anything," Gabriel murmured, putting an arm protectively around me as we hurried past the journalists. "Not a word. Detective Martins was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an unreadable expression. He led us to a small interrogation room. It was a surreal experience for me, having never been on the wrong side of the law before. Mrs. Oliveira began after turning on a recorder. "Are you aware of the charges against you?" I answered, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "Yes, and they are completely false." Gabriel intervened professionally. "Detective, I would like to make it clear that my mother categorically denies all the charges and that we are fully prepared to cooperate with the investigation, confident that the truth will prevail." The interrogation lasted 2 agonizing hours. I was questioned about every interaction I had with Daniela and her family, about my motivations for not attending the wedding, about what I really wanted when contributing to the journalistic report that exposed the Ramirez family. I answered every question honestly, but as the interrogation progressed, I noticed something disturbing in the detective's tone. It seemed like he had already formed an opinion, as if he was just going through the motions, not really investigating. When we finally left, Gabriel was tense. "He's not being impartial," he murmured as we walked towards the car. Someone had beaten us to it. My stomach sank. "Do you think Daniela's family has connections in the police?" "Maybe not directly," Gabriel replied. "But her father has enough money and influence to open doors, and desperate people don't care about ethics." In the following days, the situation worsened. The story spread to all local newspapers, but in a distorted way. Mother accused of extorting the family of her son's ex-fiancé. My name and photo were everywhere. The small beauty salon where I worked part-time called me politely to suggest that I might want to take a leave of absence until everything was resolved. Neighbors who had started greeting me again after Paulo's report looked away. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. One night, sitting at the kitchen table reviewing documents with Gabriel, I broke down in tears. "Maybe we should just give up," I whispered. "Maybe we should just say what they want to hear, publicly retract." Gabriel put down the papers and took my hands. "Mom, look at me." Her eyes were steady, determined. "That's exactly what they want, to break us, make us doubt the truth, make you feel so cornered that you'd accept any agreement to make this end. But what if they succeed? What if they arrest me for something I didn't do?" "That's not going to happen," she asserted with a conviction that I desperately wanted to share. "We have the truth on our side and now we have something more." "What?" A small smile appeared on her face. "Help. Paulo, the journalist, is furious about this attempt to criminalize the press. He's investigating Detective Martins for connections to the Ramirez family, and Clara managed to get her boss, one of the city's top criminal defense lawyers, to take our case pro bono." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't alone in this fight. The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. Paulo published a new report, this time focusing on the questionable investigative methods in the case against me. He discovered that Detective Martins had a son who worked for one of the few surviving companies from the bankrupt empire of Mr. Ramirez, a clear conflict of interest that the detective had overlooked. Simultaneously, our new lawyer, Dr. Vieira, filed a formal request questioning the validity of the evidence presented against me, demanding that it be subjected to forensic analysis to verify its authenticity. The pressure began to mount, not against us, but against the Ramirez family and the system they had tried to manipulate. 3 days after Dr. Vieira's request, we received a call from him. His usually calm voice was now filled with emotion. "The prosecution is considering dismissing the case," he said. "It seems the evidence doesn't hold up to closer scrutiny and they don't want the embarrassment of pursuing a clearly fabricated accusation." Gabriel and I embraced, crying with relief, but our celebration was interrupted by the rest of Dr. Vieira's information. "There's a condition, though. The Ramirez family is proposing an agreement. They will drop the criminal charges if we sign a public retraction of Paulo's report and accept a permanent confidentiality agreement regarding the entire matter." I looked at Gabriel, feeling anger rise within me. Even now, cornered, they were still trying to silence us, force us to deny the truth. I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength of my conviction. "I'm not going to lie to save their reputation. I'm not going to deny the truth." Gabriel nodded, a smile of pride lighting up his face. Dr. Vieira, our answer is no. Tell them we're prepared to go all the way. It was a risky gamble. We were essentially challenging a powerful and desperate family to do the worst. But something had changed within me. The fear that paralyzed me days before had been replaced by an iron determination. I had spent my entire life cowering, adjusting, sacrificing my own dignity for the comfort of others. No more. And then, when our challenge was conveyed to the Ramirez family, something extraordinary happened. They backed down. 2 weeks later, the case was officially closed due to lack of evidence. Detective Martins was removed from the case due to a conflict of interest. And the most surprising thing was, Daniela and her family left the city almost overnight, moving to a distant place where their names and reputations wouldn't be tarnished by the truth revealed. The storm had finally passed, but as we discovered in the following months, it had left as much destruction as growth in its wake. It's strange how life marks us, how certain experiences are imprinted on us, changing not only who we are, but how we see the world around us. In the months following the case's closure, I discovered that truth firsthand. The immediate relief gave way to something more complex, a healing process that was both liberating and painful. Perhaps the hardest part was accepting that even with our public vindication, some wounds would not heal completely. Some neighbors remained distant. Certain friendships never fully recovered. Doubt, once planted, is a persistent seed. Gabriel faced his own challenges, although his career at the law firm was finally advancing without the shadow of false accusations. The emotional trauma of Daniela's betrayal left him cautious, reserved. He threw himself into work with an intensity that sometimes worried me, as if he could erase the memories through sheer effort. You need to give yourself time, I would say softly on nights when I found him still bent over legal documents at 2 a.m., his eyes red from exhaustion. Pain doesn't disappear if you ignore it. I'm fine, Mom, he would always respond with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I just have a lot of work. But there were also moments of genuine growth between us. One night, about 6 months after all the commotion, we were sitting on the porch, watching a summer storm approach. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and distant lightning occasionally illuminated the dark sky. You know what's strange? Gabriel suddenly said, breaking our comfortable silence. Now, looking back, I see all the signs I ignored with Daniela, the way she talked about money, how she tried to keep me away from people who really cared about me, how she reacted when I mentioned pro bono cases. Always easier to see patterns in hindsight, I replied softly. But it's not just that. He turned to me, his serious eyes in the dim light of the porch. I wondered why I had ignored those signs, why I had wanted to believe in her so much that I was willing to sacrifice the things and people that truly mattered. That was a question I had asked myself countless times, but never dared to voice. Why had my intelligent and sensitive son fallen so completely under the spell of someone like Daniela? I think I was trying to fill something, he continued, his words coming slowly, as if he was discovering the truth as he spoke. After Dad left, I always felt there was something broken in me, something that made me insufficient. And Daniela seemed so perfect, so complete. I thought being with her would complete me too. My heart ached all those years, all those sacrifices to protect him from the pain of abandonment. And yet, she had found a way in. Gabriel, you were never insufficient. Never. I know that now, he said, a genuine smile appearing on his face. Ironically, thanks to Daniela. If she hadn't come and turned our lives upside down, maybe I never would have faced that fear. Never realized that I am enough exactly as I am. At that moment, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, I felt a sense of peace settle between us. A realization that sometimes the most violent storms bring the most necessary changes. For me, the change came gradually, but no less deeply. After decades defining my identity almost exclusively through motherhood and sacrifice, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been forgotten for a long time. I started painting again, a passion I had abandoned when Gabriel was a baby due to lack of time and resources. I began with small watercolors, then moved on to larger canvases, letting colors and shapes express what words sometimes couldn't. The first time Gabriel saw one of my completed paintings, he stood in the doorway of the small space I had transformed into an improvised studio, his eyes wide. "Mom, this is incredible. I had no idea you could paint like this." "There are many things about me you don't know," I replied with a playful smile. It was true. Parts of Elena, the woman, not just Elena, the mother, were resurfacing after a long sleep. With Clara's encouragement, I also started attending a support group for women who had gone through traumas or major life transitions. At first, I went only to listen, intimidated by the idea of sharing my story with strangers. But with time, I found my voice and, most importantly, I found a community of women who understood what it meant to be pushed to the limit and yet stand tall. It was through that group that I met Teresa, a psychologist who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives. After abusive relationships, after hearing my story, she made me a surprising proposal. "Elena, have you ever thought about using your experience to help others? We have a mentorship program for women going through similar situations, and I believe you would be an extraordinary mentor." The idea that my pain could have a greater purpose, that it could help others navigate their own storms, ignited something within me. I started training with Teresa, learning the skills needed to support others without overwhelming myself emotionally. 6 months after the case ended, I gave my first formal talk to a small group of women. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped my notes, but when I started speaking, the words flowed naturally. My name is Elena. For most of my life, I believed that loving meant losing oneself, that being strong meant enduring everything in silence. I am here to tell you that I was wrong. The women in the room, some with visible marks of their own suffering, others with hidden wounds, were looking at me. An instant connection formed through shared understanding. True strength is not about how much suffering you can endure silently, but about knowing when to speak up, when to set boundaries, when to say, "No, this is not acceptable." And sometimes, true strength is in asking for help when you need it most. As I spoke, I realized that I was not only helping those women, but also reinforcing lessons I was still learning, that my dignity mattered as much as anyone else's, that true love never demands that you become smaller, that even at 50, there was still time to discover new parts of myself. Gabriel came to find me after the talk. He was waiting outside the room with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers. When I came out, surrounded by women who wanted to talk more and share their own stories, I saw pride in their eyes. "How did it go?" he asked when I finally managed to say goodbye to the group. "Transformative," I replied honestly, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, both for them and for myself. On the way home, we talked about the future, something that seemed like a luxury we might never have again after the crisis with the Ramirezes. Gabriel was considering opening his own law firm focused on helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. I was thinking about going back to school, maybe taking a counseling course to complement my mentoring work. "Do you know what's the most incredible thing, Mom?" Gabriel said as we stopped at a traffic light. "A year ago, we were both just surviving alone. Now, we are truly living." His words perfectly captured the transformation we had experienced. The crisis that was supposed to destroy us had, instead, forced us to grow in ways we never imagined. That night, sitting alone in my small makeshift studio, I started a new painting. It wasn't of the storm we had faced, but of the dawn that followed. Warm colors of hope and renewal spreading across the horizon. As the brush slid across the canvas, I reflected on the journey that brought us here, the cruel words whispered by Daniela on the eve of the wedding that never happened. "From tomorrow, you're just old history to this family." She was right, but not in the way she imagined. The tomorrow she predicted never came. Instead, a different future unfolded, one she could never have foreseen and that I myself barely dared to dream of. A future where I was not just extra baggage in my son's life, but a woman rediscovering her own strength, where the bond between Gabriel and me, tested to the limit, emerged not only intact but stronger and healthier than ever. A future where the scars we bore were not marks of shame, but medals of survival. And as the colors mixed on the canvas before me, I felt a deep gratitude for this new dawn, not just for what it was, but for the price we paid to achieve it. A price that, though painful, was worth every cent. A year has passed since I painted that first dawn. The canvas now hangs prominently on the wall of my living room, a daily reminder of how darkness always eventually gives way to light. Time, the master of subtle transformations, did its healing work, not erasing the scars but integrating them into the tapestry of our lives. Gabriel has thrived in ways that fill my heart with a pride so deep that sometimes I can barely express it. He really opened his own law firm, small but growing rapidly, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud and legal manipulation. The work fills him in a way his previous job never did. Seeing him use his own pain as fuel to help others reminds me daily of the extraordinary man he has become. Every case is different, he said recently during one of our Sunday dinners. Now a sacred tradition for us, but the pattern is always the same. Vulnerable people being exploited by those who should protect them. I see it in every client, Mom, and it reminds me why I chose this path. As for me, my own journey continued to develop in surprising directions. Mentorship work expanded. I started giving regular talks at community centers, women's shelters, even some local universities. My message evolved beyond my own story to address broader issues. Power dynamics in relationships, signs of emotional manipulation, the importance of preserving your identity, even in the closest relationships. And yes, I completed a counseling course. At 53, I became a student again, sitting among 20-somethings, absorbing knowledge with a thirst that only life experience can truly awaken. At first, I felt out of place, almost embarrassed to be restarting so late. But soon I discovered that my unique perspective was valued by both professors and younger colleagues. "You lived what we are only studying," a 22-year-old colleague said after I shared some of my experience during a class discussion. That gives learning a completely different dimension. Painting also remained in my life, a private sanctuary for days when words were not enough. My small makeshift studio expanded to occupy the extra room that previously held mainly memories and dusty boxes. The walls are now a kaleidoscope of colors and emotions captured on canvas. Some dark works exploring the darkest corners of my journey. Others exploding with light and possibilities. 6 months ago, to my complete surprise, a small local gallery offered to exhibit some of my works in a collective show on art and healing. The opening night was surreal. Seeing strangers standing in front of my paintings, finding their own meanings in the colors and shapes I poured from my soul. Gabriel was by my side throughout the opening, a constant and supportive presence. At one point, I realized he had been silent for several minutes, observing a specific painting, one I had created during the darkest days of our legal case. Deep blue and violet tones, with only a tiny point of light in the distant horizon. "It felt like that, didn't it?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off the canvas, as if we were drowning with only a fragment of hope to hold on to. I nodded, surprised by his precise perception. Yes, it was exactly like that. He turned to me then, his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like admiration. "You were always stronger than I imagined, Mom, stronger than you even knew." Those words stayed with me, a balm in moments when old insecurities try to resurface. As for the Ramirez family and Daniela, they practically disappeared from our lives. Eventually, we learned through mutual acquaintances that they moved to another state. Occasionally, someone mentions them. A colleague from a business trip or a former university classmate who kept in touch with Daniela. Each time that happens, I feel a strange mix of emotions, a distant echo of past pain, but also a reluctant gratitude. It seems contradictory to feel anything but bitterness towards people who tried to destroy us so methodically. But the truth is, without that devastating storm, we might never have discovered the depth of our own resilience. Maybe I would still be living on the fringes of my own life, defining my worth solely through my role as a mother. Maybe Gabriel would still be chasing a version of success that wouldn't truly fill him. No, I'm not grateful to them. I could never be, but I am grateful for the woman I became by surviving them. About 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. Gabriel appeared for our Sunday dinner with a guest, Camila, an environmental lawyer he met during a collaborative case. At first, that familiar old anxiety stirred in my chest. The ghosts of Daniela loomed in the shadows of my mind, ready to remind me how easily I was discarded before. But Camila was not Daniela. That became clear in the first 5 minutes of conversation. Where Daniela talked about herself non-stop, Camila asked genuine questions, interested in the answers. Where Daniela treated me with condescension, Camila treated me with a warm respect that didn't seem forced or calculated. At one point, while serving dessert, she noticed one of my smaller paintings hanging in the hallway. "This is simply extraordinary," she said, approaching to examine it better. "The way you captured that specific light, did you study formally?" I replied, a little embarrassed by the attention. "Not really. It's more of a recent hobby I picked up." "Well, you have a genuine talent," she said, and there was something in the sincerity of her tone that moved me deeply. "My mother is a curator at a gallery in Villa Horizonte. She would love to see your work." After Camila left, Gabriel and I washed the dishes side by side. A comfortable silence between us until he finally spoke. "So, what did you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but unable to hide the importance of my response completely. Considered carefully before responding. "She seems real, present, the kind of person who truly sees others." Gabriel let out a sigh that I didn't notice he was holding. "Yes, that's exactly what I feel too." "Are you serious?" I asked, trying not to push too hard. "We're taking it slow," he replied with a small smile playing on his lips. "Both of us have our own history of complicated relationships, but I do believe it could be something special." I felt a lump in my throat, a mix of hope and that residual fear that maybe will never completely disappear. Gabriel must have seen something in my face because he put down the plate he was drying and held my wet hands in his. "Mom, I learned my lesson the hardest way possible. I learned to see the warning signs, to value substance over appearance, to never let anyone separate me from the people who truly love me." His eyes met mine, firm and clear, "And that includes you. It will always include you." That night, after Gabriel left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea looking at the stars. I thought about the young mother I once was, holding a small child who asked when Dad would come home. I thought about all the nights I stayed up, worried if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. If I could go back in time and talk to that younger version of myself, what would I say? Maybe that the sacrifices would be worth it, but that she shouldn't lose herself completely in them. That one day her son would be an extraordinary man, not despite the difficulties they faced, but because of them. That there would be pain, yes, so much pain, but also moments of pure joy that would make it all worth it. And maybe, most importantly, I would tell her that the story doesn't end with, "and then they lived happily ever after." It ends with, "and then they kept living, growing, learning, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward, stronger together than they could ever be apart." Last week, I received an unexpected invitation. A nonprofit organization working with women transitioning from abusive relationships asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual fundraising event. The irony wasn't lost on me. Me, who once felt so small, so easily disposable, now invited to share my wisdom with hundreds. I accepted, of course, and while working on my speech last night, I found myself going back to those cruelly whispered words on the eve of the wedding that never happened. "From tomorrow on, you're just old history for this family." Daniela was wrong, but not in the way I initially imagined. I am not ancient history, I am a story in progress that is still being written in chapters that no one, not even I, could have foreseen. Looking to the future now, at 54 years old, I see possibilities where before I only saw limitations. I see a son blossoming on his chosen path, perhaps building a new love based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I see my own work touching lives in ways I never imagined I could. I see new sunrises waiting to be painted, stories waiting to be told, wounds waiting to be transformed into wisdom. And if someone asks me how we survived the storm that almost destroyed us, I will say this. When cruel words try to define you, when malicious hands try to mold you into something small and disposable, remember who you really are. You are not just a mother or a son or any other single role that the world tries to reduce you to. You are a universe of possibilities. You are a story yet to be written. You are greater than any definition others try to impose on you. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, when they whisper that from tomorrow you are no longer part of the family, that your value has run out, that your place at the table no longer exists, remember this. True belonging never depends on someone else's permission. The true family is not defined by prenuptial agreements or financial interests. And your story, well, your story belongs to you alone. It was that truth that saved Gabriel and me in our darkest moment. It was that truth that allowed us to emerge not only as survivors, but as transformed. And it is that truth that I carry with me now, a beacon to light not only my own path, but perhaps also the path of others who are still struggling to find their light. Today, when I look at myself in the mirror, I no longer see just the exhausted single mother who sacrificed everything, nor the woman discarded with cruel words whispered on a summer night. I see Elena complete, complex, still evolving. A woman who, after spending most of her life caring for others, finally learned to care for herself as well. And perhaps that is the sweetest victory of all. Now, if you liked this story, click on the next video that appears on the screen, because in it, the story of betrayal and turmoil, like you've never seen before.